Russia can destroy any country on Earth in 30 minutes. But it cannot build an iPhone factory. Let that sink in. Russia holds the largest nuclear stockpile on the planet, bigger than America's. Their RS-28 Sarmat missile carries multiple warheads and can hit any point on Earth in under 30 minutes. And if Moscow itself gets wiped out, their dead-hand system fires back automatically. Nobody wants to fight that. But here is where it gets interesting. Russia's entire economy is worth $2.17 trillion. California alone, $4.1 trillion. One American state, bigger than all of Russia. And the full United States economy, $28.75 trillion. More than 13 times the size of Russia. Russia cannot build a modern semiconductor chip factory because the only machines on Earth that print advanced chips are made by one Dutch company, ASML. And sanctions mean Russia cannot buy a single one. Then there is geography. Russia's most strategic route to the Mediterranean runs through the Bosphorus Strait, controlled by Turkey. In wartime, Turkey closes that door. Russia's entire Black Sea fleet, locked in a pond. Military untouchable. Economy fragile. Geography, a trap. And President Trump saw all of this. He understood that you don't need to fire a single shot. When economic pressure, strategic sanctions and energy dominance do the work for you. That is not weakness. That is genius. How long can a nuclear superpower survive on a middle-income budget? That is the question no one in Moscow wants to answer. What I am about to walk you through today is one of the most important geopolitical stories unfolding right now on the world stage. A story about power, about strategy, about which nations are rising, which are falling, and where America stands in all of it. So stay with me, because by the time we are done here, you are going to see this world very differently. Let us begin. In the last several days, the world witnessed two summits that will define the next decade of global power. The first was between President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. The second, exactly 1 week later, was between Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin. And when you line those two meetings up side by side, and look at them the way a strategist looks at a chessboard, something remarkable becomes clear, something that the mainstream media is not telling you, something that should make every patriotic American stand a little taller today. Let me explain. Vladimir Putin traveled to Beijing this week to meet with Xi Jinping. He went there with a very specific and very urgent goal. Putin wanted to finalize a deal for a massive natural gas pipeline called Siberia 2. This pipeline was meant to run directly from Russian territory into China. It was supposed to be China-funded, Chinese-built, and it was supposed to throw a lifeline to the Russian economy, which is hemorrhaging under the weight of international sanctions, runaway inflation, and the extraordinary costs of a war in Ukraine that has gone on far longer than Putin ever imagined. He needed that deal. He went to Beijing believing he would get it. He did not get it. Xi Jinping looked Vladimir Putin in the eye and said no, not publicly, not dramatically. But the outcome speaks for itself. No agreement, no pipeline, no economic rescue package. And that, my fellow Americans, tells you everything you need to know about where Russia stands in the world today. Russia is not a co-equal partner with China. Russia is the junior partner. And Xi Jinping made sure Putin understood that this week. Now, why does this matter to you, sitting at home in America? It matters because for years, the globalist foreign policy establishment told us that Russia and China were an unbreakable alliance, an axis of power that America could not overcome. They told us that the two nations were unified, coordinated, and marching together toward a new world order that would displace American leadership. They were wrong, and the events of this week prove it. What we are seeing is not a unified Sino-Russian bloc. What we are seeing is a creditor and a debtor. China is the bank. Russia is the borrower. And Xi Jinping is beginning to wonder whether Russia can ever pay back what it owes. Think about what China has done for Russia over the past 3 years. China has purchased Russian energy to keep the Russian economy afloat. China has supplied Russia with dual-use components that feed directly into Russia's defense manufacturing. China has provided the economic oxygen that has allowed Russia to continue its war in Ukraine. Without Chinese support, that war likely ends. Putin knows it, Xi knows it, and increasingly the entire world knows it. But here is the thing about China that you have to understand if you want to understand how Xi Jinping thinks. China does not do anything out of generosity. China does not invest in other nations out of friendship or ideology. China invests because it expects a return. Always. And when that return is not forthcoming, China finds other ways to collect. And here is where the story gets deeply significant. Analysts and Chinese experts who have been monitoring this relationship closely are now saying something extraordinary. They are saying that if China does not receive adequate repayment for its massive financial support of Russia, Beijing may begin to look at alternative forms of compensation. Non-financial forms, territorial forms. You heard that correctly. There are regions of Russian territory in the Far East, along the historical borders of China, that Beijing has never forgotten. Territories that, according to Chinese historical records and Chinese national memory, were taken from China by Russia in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. For generations, those territorial grievances were set aside. But as Russia grows weaker, and as Chinese investment in Russia grows deeper, those old ambitions are beginning to resurface in Beijing's strategic calculations. This is what happens when a nation wages reckless war, burns through its national wealth, alienates the Western world, and then throws itself completely at the mercy of a more powerful neighbor. Russia made a catastrophic strategic miscalculation, and now Xi Jinping holds the leverage. But here is what I want you to hold on to, America. While Putin was in Beijing, empty-handed, unable to secure the deal he desperately needed, where was President Donald Trump? What was he doing? He had been in China just 1 week earlier, and while the liberal media tried to spin that summit as a defeat or a disappointment, let us look at what actually happened. Xi Jinping for the first time publicly acknowledged that Taiwan should not pursue independence. That statement came within 24 hours of President Trump's summit with Xi. 24 hours. You think that is a coincidence? You think Xi Jinping made that kind of concession on Taiwan, the single most explosive issue in all of Asia-Pacific geopolitics, because he felt like it, because he was in a generous mood? No. Xi Jinping made that statement because President Trump created the conditions in which it was the rational thing for Xi to do. Because President Trump walked into that room, not as a supplicant, not as an apologist, not as a multilateral diplomat, who needed 17 international committee approvals before he could make a decision. He walked in as the leader of the most powerful nation on earth, with leverage, with clarity, and with a negotiating style that the globalist establishment has never understood, because they have never possessed it. That is what strength looks like in diplomacy. Now I want to be clear about something. Xi Jinping is a formidable adversary. Let no one underestimate him. His singular strategic ambition is to displace the United States as the #1 economic and geopolitical power on Earth. He is pursuing that goal relentlessly. He is investing in military modernization, in technological supremacy, in Belt and Road infrastructure across the developing world, and in deepening his leverage over weaker nations that cannot resist Chinese capital. He is patient, he is disciplined, and he is playing a very long game. But here is what makes America different. Here is what makes this moment different. For the first time in a generation, America has a president who is playing the same kind of long game. A president who understands that economic power is strategic power, who understands that energy independence is national security, who understands that trade deals must serve American workers, not foreign corporations, who understands that the American taxpayer is not the world's piggy bank, and who understands that when you negotiate with Xi Jinping, you do not do so from a position of apology or accommodation. You do so from a position of unmatched strength. That is what Donald Trump brings to the table, and the world knows it. Now let us talk about Russia and Belarus, because there is another dimension to this story that deserves your full attention. Even as Putin was sitting in Beijing, unable to secure his pipeline deal, military exercises were beginning in Belarus. Joint nuclear exercises. Russia and Belarus, conducting drills with nuclear-capable delivery systems, sending a very deliberate signal to the outside world. Russia is still here. Russia still has nuclear weapons. Russia cannot be ignored. Let me give you the unvarnished analysis of what those exercises actually mean. They mean Russia is scared. When a nation is winning, when a nation is confident, when a nation is advancing on every strategic front, it does not need to wave its nuclear weapons around to remind the world it exists. Nations that are winning negotiate from confidence. Nations that are losing negotiate with threats. And the pattern here is unmistakable. Think about the last 4.5 years of this conflict. Every time the United States and its allies made a decision to provide Ukraine with more advanced military assistance, Russia issued nuclear threats. When anti-tank missiles were approved, nuclear threats. When main battle tanks were approved, nuclear threats. When F-16 fighter jets entered the conversation, nuclear threats. Red line after red line was drawn by Moscow. And when those lines were crossed, what did Russia do? Nothing. Western intelligence agencies, which have been monitoring Russian nuclear forces as their absolute top priority throughout this conflict, have found zero credible indicators that Russia has increased the operational readiness of its nuclear arsenal. No warheads have been moved to forward positions. No delivery systems have been placed on heightened alert. The saber rattling is exactly that. Rattling. The substance behind it is hollow. And Xi Jinping knows it too. Chinese intelligence services are just as capable of reading Russian military posture as Western agencies are. Xi's not impressed by the nuclear theater coming out of Moscow. He is not intimidated. He is watching Russia's military grind through its manpower reserves, watching the Russian economy deteriorate, and making his strategic calculations accordingly. Now let us talk about Belarus specifically, because this is a nation that deserves far more attention than it receives in American news coverage. Alexander Lukashenko, the leader of Belarus, is often described as Putin's closest ally. And that is not inaccurate, but the relationship is more complicated than that description suggests. Lukashenko is in many respects a puppet. Belarus is a puppet state. Russian influence over Minsk is total. And yet Lukashenko has consistently refused to do the one thing Putin most desperately wants from him, which is to open a second front in Ukraine by sending Belarusian forces directly into the conflict. Why has he refused? Because Lukashenko understands something Putin sometimes seems to forget. He understands that his own political survival depends on keeping his military at home. Lukashenko is not a popular leader. He survived a significant popular uprising in Belarus in the period just before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. He survived it only because his security forces cracked down with overwhelming force, and because Russian backing propped him up. If he sends his army into Ukraine, those forces get tied down in a grinding war of attrition. And who protects Lukashenko then? Nobody. So when you hear reports about Belarusian forces massing near the Ukrainian border, when you hear alarming commentary about a potential second front opening up, I want you to understand what that posturing actually is. It is pressure. It is a feint. It is designed to force Ukraine to divert defensive resources northward, to thin out Ukrainian lines, to create strategic anxiety, without Russia having to actually commit additional forces to the fight. It is psychological warfare. And while it is not without some tactical effect, it is far from the devastating second front that Russian propagandists would like the world to believe is coming. Putin likes having his puppet state. He likes having his puppet leader. And he showed the world as much on the 9th of May, at the Great Victory Day parade in Moscow, when virtually the only foreign leader seated beside him was Lukashenko. That image tells you something. When you are the leader of a country that claims to be a great power, and the only ally willing to sit beside you at your most important national ceremony, is the leader of a country most people cannot find on a map. You are not in a position of strength, you are in a position of isolation, and yet the exercises go on. The threats continue. The nuclear saber rattling continues, its familiar cycle, because Russia has no other cards to play. Meanwhile, Ukraine has been conducting something that deserves serious attention and serious respect. Ukraine has been striking directly at Russian critical infrastructure, Russian oil and gas facilities, Russian defense manufacturing plants, with remarkable precision and with extraordinary courage, given the disparity in size between the two nations. Ukraine is essentially imposing its own version of sanctions on Russia, through force, explosive sanctions, as some analysts have begun to call them. And those strikes are having a meaningful impact on Russia's ability to sustain its war economy. This is why the nuclear threats are back. Because when Ukraine succeeds in degrading Russian infrastructure, Russia looks for ways to change the subject, to shift the strategic narrative, to make the conversation about nuclear risk rather than about Russian failure on the battlefield and in the economy. Do not be distracted by the theater. Watch what is actually happening. Now let me pull all of this together because I want to leave you with something that matters. I want to leave you with a picture of where America stands in all of this, and why this moment right now is one that should fill every American with genuine pride. The old world order, the one that the globalist establishment spent decades building and defending, was premised on a set of assumptions that are now crumbling before our eyes. The assumption that China and Russia were invincible partners. The assumption that American economic power could be diluted through multilateral institutions and global agreements. The assumption that strong American leadership was somehow dangerous, somehow reckless, somehow less sophisticated than the gentle diplomacy of career bureaucrats and international committees. Those assumptions are gone, and a new picture is emerging. Russia is weakening. Its economy is deteriorating. Its military has been ground down in a war it never expected to last this long. Its only major ally is now treating it as a dependent, a debtor, a junior partner to be managed rather than respected. Russia went to Beijing this week, looking for a lifeline, and came home with nothing. China is powerful. Yes. Xi Jinping is ambitious. Yes. But China is also watching carefully. China is calculating. And China is operating in a world where the United States, under President Trump, has demonstrated that it will not be pushed around, will not absorb unfair trade practices without consequence, and will not cede its position as the leading economic and strategic power on Earth without a fight. That changes everything, because Xi Jinping, for all his ambition, is a rational actor. He understands cost-benefit analysis. He understands leverage. And when America demonstrates, clearly and unambiguously, that it possesses leverage, that it is willing to use it, and that its leader is not afraid to walk away from a bad deal, China adjusts. Xi adjusted on Taiwan. That is not a small thing. That is a massive thing, and it happened because of American strength. This is the world that President Trump is navigating. Not with apologies, not with accommodation, not with the tired, failed playbook of the establishment that gave us decades of bad trade deals, endless foreign wars, and an America that was taken advantage of by nations that smiled at us at international conferences while picking our pockets. He is navigating it with clarity, with leverage, with the understanding that American power, when wielded with confidence and conviction, changes the behavior of every other nation on Earth. That is not arrogance. That is not recklessness. That is leadership, real leadership. The kind of leadership that the American people have always deserved, and that for too long they were denied. So the next time someone tells you that American power is declining, the next time someone tells you that China is unstoppable, the next time someone tells you that Russia's nuclear threats mean America should back down or back away, remember what you have heard today. Remember that Russia went to Beijing looking for a lifeline and came home empty-handed. Remember that China acknowledged publicly that Taiwan should not seek independence within 24 hours of sitting across the table from Donald Trump. Remember that Russia's nuclear exercises are the behavior of a nation that is scared, not a nation that is winning. Remember that Ukraine is striking Russian infrastructure with a courage and a precision that is degrading Russia's ability to wage war. And remember that America, under strong leadership, does not retreat, it advances.